Good morning, Dr. Brad.
Well, hello, Curt.
Good morning. You had your coffee? You were prepared this morning. Well, we were just talking, and then
Mhm.
Brad just popped in and scared me because I was unprepared for his teleportation into my space. But anyway, we were talking about what we were watching, and I was just watching a video by I can't remember what the professor's name is. He teaches law, and he's going over the positive law movement, and I just feel my blood pressure rising and the steam coming out of my ears because it's clear he doesn't understand what he's saying, right? And he's good, right? This isn't like something special. He's not unique. I mean, it's like they don't all of them understand what they're saying.
Forgive them. They
What
know not what they do.
they know exactly. And what I was having a little bit of a conniption uh
Oh,
because I realized how many fields got so up.
oh, I saw that. I read your post on the Twitter there a minute ago, and it was like it's just they just took a wrong turn. Everybody,
It
and it's
just
Kurt, it's we've discussed this before, and it is the fact is that they went to failure, exhaustion of opportunities, and have no they're rudderless
yes,
because they don't have the specificity of logics, languages, and grammars to bring them back on target.
right.
And that's what it takes. It must fail in order to be reformed to
Yeah, this is the argument that the science progresses with frustrations from failures, right?
it's just awful, isn't it?
Well, it's awful in that we're living a huge crisis because of it. And, in retrospect, I mean, Hayek said this, and I quote it all the time, but, we look back at the angels on the head of a pin nonsense, right?
I make fun of them.
And we're doing the same thing right now. We just don't know it any more than they did. And so
That was that was remarkably rude. I liked it.
it's awful.
Just
And and
as
you
rude.
realize and you realize what we've done with unifying. I mean, what we do is so profound, you can't communicate it to someone. Like you could go to someone and say, well, evolution works like this way and over time or whatever, and it doesn't require it. You can sort of get that story, but how the hell do we tell, how do you, because it's at least tangible to you. It's conceivable in the sense that we've been domesticating animals, right? And so you can see that domestication of animals. So you have at least a framework.
Okay.
But when you talk
Right.
about, we're talking about is just, it's a process of evolutionary computation between charges and balance. And there's only three axes to this pole. Three polarity axes to this thing, and so the universe, and so there's only.
It was funny because I was like watching that fellow that was having fights with you the other day, and he was just going off in mad world. It was funny to watch because I'm like, okay, just watching sparks go.
Yeah, so it's like it's
Roman
I
candles.
don't walk around saying, "Oh, look how smart we are." It's more like I completely understand why this is hard to get. You know what I mean? I completely get it. I have compassion
Yes,
for the fact that how the hell do they know we're not talking nonsense, and,
can't they must presume you're talking nonsense.
right. So, the same thing is that I'm listening to this guy this morning talk about the emergence of legal positivism, but I mean, it's like the emergence of Marxism is an admission of failure. The emergence of legal positivism is an emergence of failure. The emergence of the analytic method, because the failure of the computational innovation, is an acknowledgement of failure. The replatonization of physics by Einstein and Bohr is a acknowledgement of failure. And then you have these people come along, and I'm one of them, right? Which is, like Brewer and Brigman in math and physics, and they're coming along and saying, this isn't science, what we're doing, right? And they just don't quite have the tools, right? They're saying what they're saying is true, but they don't have quite the tools. And I keep coming back to this one principle that the common thread in misunderstanding, despite the beauty of Archimedes and Euclid,
Yes.
is that mathematics is a gold standard rather than computation. In other words, and so they have inherited some things from mathematics, and they didn't understand the limits of mathematics because they didn't know about computation. And like Mandelbrot said, until you have computation, you can't see what's wrong with mathematics. Because you can't see what's inexpressible, because you literally can't do the calculations that a computer can. You can't physically perform them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't come up with fractals and say, oh, fuck, I get it.
Whoa, look at that.
Yeah, oh, shit, we had it all wrong. You know, the only person that I know that understands as well as I do is Joshua Bach.
Mm-hmm.
And he should, because he's one of the leading AI guys.
The issue, the funny thing is, this is it's a epistemic failure. That's all it is. And it's like it has to be there. It has to be there. It's what we're talking about here is a different paradigm, and it's like it has to be there. So it's an inevitable function that we have to suffer through this, because it seems the disaster you see all around, which is the failure of all these disciplines, comes to sufficient discomfort to cause them to move.
Mm-hmm.
And to Nietzsche talked about it as the revaluation of all values. That's all it is. And it's like, because it's like, and really the hard one, then this I got from working with you, which is the individual status is the value that is the hardest to change. And that one is the one most resistant to change, which is why the road to the new paradigm is lined with headstones.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, so, you know, and so it's like I just want to fight with the guy. Well, I mean, I literally want to argue with the video, right?
Oh my God.
I'm so angry that I want to argue with him, because but then my understanding is they're doing the best they can. But he starts quoting Austin and Bentham, and I'm like, well, they were the West's admission of failure, and then you got Rez, Kelsen, and Dworkin, who are all Jewish, and they're like bringing their authoritarian legal mumbo jumbo to the discourse, and they're revising Jewish law, right, just as much as Abrahamists are revising the Marxists are revising Abrahamic religion. And it's like everybody's trapped in their paradigm.
It's inevitable,
and they can't get out of it.
Well, they're obligated to double down to the exhaustion of opportunity. So you have to. It's this scorched earth policy is all that is left. It's like,
can I run with it? Sorry.
Yes.
I don't want to lose my train of thought. The problem is there is an innate skepticism to the Anglo model, the European model, right? It's actually skeptical of everything. All right. And that's part of the problem with our confidence, right? Is that we have lost a little of our confidence in it on ourselves because we're skeptical. But Jewish thought isn't like that. It's profoundly arrogant. They think they're divine and leaders and whatever, and they have the false positive of being exceptional at the Abrahamic method and the feminine method, and so they're verbally articulate. Superior verbal articulation is rewarding them down a path of falsehood. And so and so they have a high confidence in something that's false. Now we have low confidence in something that's true. because we can't put it into words and prove it. We have to manifest it as behavior to believe it, right? So because we have our skepticism, and you realize even this is an effing catastrophe, right?
Even what is this?
Even this incognizant of the two elites in the world, the Jewish thinkers and the European thinkers, right? We only have two elites thinkers in the world, and those two are in opposite paradigms, and one has feminine overconfidence in their authority for universalism, and the masculine, which is us, has universal skepticism because our prohibition on authority. So we have to, it's like this Missouri show me state. Well, that's just a reduction of Europeanism to its
Wait, what?
its fundamental principle, which is it has to be evidentiary. We have to have evidence to prove it. So you have a scriptural authoritarianism in the Jewish sense. It's a scriptural verbal authoritarianism, and then you have empirical sovereignty on the skeptical empirical sovereignty on the European side, and they're the fucking opposites. And you wonder why we're having this collision right now, because they don't know what they're doing and they're wrong. We know what we're doing are right, but we know how to talk about it. And it took us to solve the freaking problem so we could talk about it and it's science. It's just nuts. When you step back and you're in the movie, it's like if you were watching, if you're an alien and you came to the planet and you watch these monkeys, these hairless monkeys doing this, you'd look at it and you'd say, well, this is kind of funny. They're kind of stupid, right? But we're in it, so we're wrapped up in it, and we're, as you always say, the fish in the water of our own stream, and so we don't recognize it. So we're
hard to see it. It's hard to see it.
And so I keep coming, I keep running up with this thing, and it's like I struggle all the time. You and I struggle. The team struggles. How do we talk about something so that a person can understand it and to make it tangible?
And it's ridiculous, man.
And it's freaking hard, and it's not. It's because most things aren't scale independent, right? I mean, so when you're trying to talk about Darwin, that you can pull that out of.
That's right, because it's a scale.
It's a scale.
At a scale.
Yes. But we're talking about scale independence. We're talking about everything. The universe.
It's like, you know how hard that is?
It's just fucking impossible.
Talking about everything all at the same time.
So I was along these lines. So I'm working down this same path of thought, and I'm thinking, well, I had this problem with, the mathematics turns out to be the one way of thinking. And it has one, it's more like sets have one way of explaining things. Mathematics has another way of explaining things, and it's more powerful than sets, because sets is basically just ordinary reasoning. And then you get to what we call computation, which is following an algorithmic process. But in a computation, an algorithmic process, it's the difference between mathematics is dependent on static criteria. Computation is dependent on dynamic criteria, dynamic inputs, and simulation is dependent on externalities. So it's static internal, dynamic internal, and dynamic external. And if you go all the way back to sets, it's just entirely internal. That's the problem with verbal. It's not externally correspondent. So you have this sequence here. And if you look at the sequence as a set of grammars, in other words, what's expressible in each of these grammars, because what are the dimensions that's tolerable, that each grammar includes or excludes, right? A set includes different than mathematics, includes different than computation, and simulation, right? And so you look at this spectrum, and it's like, well, I mean, these things are each increasingly computable, or they're solvable. They're greater problems. At some point, you can't. The simulation is just the thing itself, right? The universe is the thing itself, right? There's no simulation of it. I mean, we can attempt to simulate it, but the thing itself is the end. So after simulation, there's just the thing itself, right? That's the system itself that's performing it. Well, every one of these things is more statistical as you move from the thing in itself to the simulation to the computation to the mathematics to the set. In other words, they're more. It's more breaking things down into into bigger and bigger blocks of less precision, with less ability with more subtracted information. Like there's way more.
It's inflated and ambiguous.
Yes, and so that's why you can say stupid things in especially language sets, which is language is mostly sets. You can say stupid things there, but it's hard to say stupid things in simulations. But then again, you can't predict a simulation, right? You can't always predict a computation, as Rule 34 has stated. It's called Rule 34. It's one of Wolfram's Markov chains. Or you can't. There's things in mathematics that can be calculated, but there are things that can't be calculated in mathematics because they're mathematically irreducible.
Insoluble algorithms, yeah.
And so the problem is when I look at this, I'm like, these are just a set of grammars that go up all the way to natural language, formal written language, natural language, idiomatic language, narration, storytelling, fictionalizing, lying, denying, and whatever. So to us, it's just another grammar because we understand these are just dimensions that are included or excluded, right? So there's information you can appeal to within them. But you hear these people talking about these things, and they have no fucking idea of the architecture underneath what they're saying. They have no idea that
they haven't bothered to think about it.
Well, could they think about it? I worked with linguists at Microsoft because we probably this is funny. I think I had 70 people working over there at one point trying to harmonize Microsoft's language.
Okay.
So that everybody used the right terminology because things were going all over the place. They're all librarians. You want to talk about nerds? Librarians are fucking nerds.
Undervalued.
They're charming as hell. They're all adorable, but they're nerds. So I had like 70 people over there working on this stuff. And so, and then you go and you went from there to the AI team because they were trying to do a similar thing and they couldn't pull it off, which is natural language processing team. And look at the data structures they're using. And I'm like, yeah, I understand this. I don't think you understand. And you realize it's like if somebody puts out a paper that's got a gem of an idea, another gem, and there's the synthesis sometimes comes together and it doesn't. Whereas the basic problem is you can't reduce language to human syntactical form other than as language. In other words, there's no equivalent to mathematic representation of language other than the neural network itself. So that's why these LLMs are working, is because the language itself is the only set of symbols that can be used to produce it. So, right. And that's because the number of dimensions, like I always say, that there's only 7 or 8 dimensions in nouns and 7 or 8 dimensions in verbs, and basically 2 dimensions in agreements, and then you have adverbs and adjectives, right? And so, but I mean, you don't have that many dimensions. But when you start talking about permutations of those dimensions, all right, now, and then you talk about permutations of senses, you're all of a sudden getting up into, okay, this is not representable in any way that's humanly conceivable, except the language itself, which is another way of saying, at some point, the simulation is the thing, right? I mean, and so that's that's I always wonder if people understand what the fuck I'm talking about. I think I'm making perfect sense, but I have no idea if people understand.
I want to make my comment now, okay?
What?
So Curt got all charged up. He got all charged up before we came on, and Curt was all charged up and wanted to slap down the computer that was feeding him the information that was getting him charged up because the guy was making him riled up. And now he's unwinding on me.
Sorry. Well, it's
There's no harm, no foul. It's okay. It's just
But
like
it does explain the problem, right? I mean, the problem is we actually have universal commensurability. We've actually solved it. I mean, in retrospect, it's kind of stupid.
I know, but see, the issue is this: it's like it's the premise is true, and it's hard to believe.
Yes.
And even the construct itself may not be, it may not be conceivable to the people with whom you would like to communicate.
Yes.
So the only thing that remains is actually communicating with them. Because when you can communicate with them, they cannot deny that you're communicating with them.
Yes.
In their own language, and that their language will fail them in communicating with you because they fail to have the precision of language necessary to communicate with you and maintain their social priority.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about this, I don't know, a year ago or so, but I said, I think I don't know if it's the hardest discipline, but it's the hardest one to learn. Right. I mean, it's, there's
the mind is repelled by it.
Yes.
Because it's unbelievable.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes. It's so like you can sort of do math a lot and get it. And so you can train yourself to develop this intuition, but there's no reason to disagree with the intuition. There's only disagreeing with the effort or the work, right? Or the time required, because it requires, that's why the Chinese are so good at math is, I mean, they make them work on it 10 hours a freaking day.
Right.
Right. And so, but our stuff is on the lines of, well, it's hard and I have to unlearn.
But there's a confidence issue there. Is there social proofs in math? Okay.
Yes.
So that it's like everybody's making their kid do it for 10 hours in China. Everybody's doing it because everybody knows that's the right answer. Okay. So it's like this one is like this. You're just a lone guy in the woods making noises about something that's making great claims. And it's like hard to believe, to make the leap of faith necessary to put in the work necessary to be able to process it.
If you could, I agree, but I can't get legitimacy. Could I do this in the academy? No, they first of all, I couldn't put a dissertation committee to do it because I tried. And the second of all, the findings I come to are so antagonistic to the academy that they'd fire me.
That's okay.
Well, no, I'm just saying that social.
We're not in argument.
How do we get social proof other than the way Darwin did, which is you just fucking publish?
That's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing. So
that's what we're doing, and it's like I just what we're doing is the right answer, and it's like okay, I don't have a better plan. Sorry.
We're doing the.
No, I really am sorry.
And I just for the audience, if Brad hadn't showed up to help me, I might have given up by now. It was too frustrating.
No, I said, dear God, I must help this poor man.
So frustrated. So because you really, I mean, the amount of help you've given, my ability to your demand that I make it accessible.
That's ridiculous too. I like it.
Oh my God. Very patient man you are. So did I make my point about the sets, mathematics, computation, simulation, reality? Did I make that sort of?
I think it did, but it will take some additional listening because it's like you were talking fast and I couldn't write it down fast enough. And I wrote down a lot, and I did not get all because there's a chunk missing, and that's okay. I'll look at it again.
Well, can I take this thing?
Sure.
You have a point that's a 0 dimensions, right? You have a line that's 1 dimension. You have a plane, a triangle that's two dimensions. You have object or cube, that's 3 dimensions. You have a cube rotating in space, which is 4 dimensions, right? But when we talked about language having dimensions, right? It's properties, right? And properties. Each property is a dimension, like when it was, and who did it, and what the permissibility of it was, and that kind of stuff, right? And whether you liked it, whether it's something that's likable or not, etc., desirable or not. And you have all these. You have this. So you have nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs, and then agreements. And called the propositions are just filler, right? So the prepositions are just fillers, etc. So you basically, but you really have references to states, references to changes, adverbs, and references to agreements or disagreements, right? True, false. That's all you get. But you start playing with that and say, well, there's a lot of dimensions there. There's way more dimensions than there are in the geometry. But geometry at least gets the idea that there are dimensions, right? Well, then, but if you get a language, look, what would the geometry of language look like? It wouldn't look like anything. It would have no, I mean, it doesn't. It looks like a neural network, right? Can a neural network be generalized into something you can understand? It's just a fucking mess of wires, right? No, you can't generalize it into anything. I mean, you might be able to see patterns move through it, but you can't. I mean, we can't even look at our own AIs today and figure out why they're doing what they're doing, right? For the same reason, because it's not generalizable, or what it means reducible, right? So things can be reducible to sets, reducible to measurements, mathematics, ratios, reducible to operations, which is the spectrum of computations, reducible to simulations. Or they're irreducible because they're the thing itself, right? The thing itself is the only reduction that's possible, which is basically the universe.
That's right.
Right. And so you have this spectrum here. Well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is in order to be able to do math, I've got to create tools which can compensate for the incapacity of the human mind to maintain state about these variables. And that's why we write math down. Is we externalize it, just like we write stories down, or we write measure counts down, etc. So we get in this tool, and you have to do it. When you get to computation, you can sort of think this stuff through, right? But there gets to the point where computation, which is where bugs come from, is like I'm not really sure exactly bugs come from, where bugs come from, and I'm like, I'm not really sure. I have to go observe this.
Oh, right.
Motion, already. So we have. That's why we have development.
You mean computer bugs? Yeah.
Yes, computer bugs. Yes, sorry.
No, that's okay.
And then you have simulations where it's like, I don't know, the game of life is the simple example, but my favorite one is where you have the rabbits and the green stuff and the wolves, or some variation of that. In other words, you have territory, which is different. You have a resource. You have the rabbits that eat the green stuff and the wolves that eat the rabbits. And you could run that thing 1,000 times and a pattern will develop, but it's not predictable.
Not at any given moment.
Right. So you could say, well, in general, over X many years, or what's really going to happen is it's going to develop a sinusoidal equilibrium that will sometimes collapse. Right. Which is what will generally happen in any system. It'll run into if it's self-regulating, it'll form a relative equilibrium, except that in some cases,
sometimes
it will collapse, which happens. And then you have the thing itself, which is I guess the universe was playing the same game, which someday it's maintaining equilibrium, but someday it will collapse.
It's like, oh my, that's a funny thing. It's like goes to failure. Anything that can't last forever eventually breaks.
Yes.
Right? There's some aphorism that goes
There's
like
no
that.
infinities is what it means. There aren't any. All their infinity means, I don't know, somewhere out there, there's a limit. I don't know what it is. I'm just saying I don't know what it is. That's all it means. Anyway, so I think that's actually that's one of those things that if you get the grammars, right? If you get the math, you can get the grammars, right? It's dimensions.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's a point at which humans can't reduce anything to
We can't talk
expression.
about that.
You can't, right? And we're a little bit in we're sort of in this problem, as we can set up the rules of the simulation, but you have to run the simulation in your head a bunch of times on a bunch of problems to sort of grok it, which is what our people do, right? And that's why it's kind of hard to learn, right? Is because you don't like it in the first place, right? You don't want to run it in the second place.
Wait, you run the simulation, you find out stuff you don't want to know.
Don't want to know, exactly. So
it's painful to learn.
It's painful.
Oh, and it's frustrating because you're like you're generating the signal that is it's a good signal, and it is the closest signal that conforms to reality that we have discovered. And that's okay. And it's frustrating because you run into the people in their obstinate ways that can cling to their wrong signal. Which is that the liberals make fun of the conservatives by talking about them as clutching to Bibles and guns.
Well, that's interesting, because what it really means is they're clutching to first principles, and they can't, and the liberal mind can't conceive of that. Is that the conservatives said, I only have to obey, it's like the 10 Commandments, right? I only got to obey these 10 Commandments, I'm pretty much okay. Well, the conservatives got the same attitude, is that I don't have to get very fit. The world is really simple. I got to obey this set of simple rules, and dynamically everything will take care of itself, which basically means obey these rules and be responsible for what you're responsible for, right? And then everything will work out. And the things that don't work out, we can get together in a thing or a Senate or a parliament and say, okay, none of us wants to pay for this unless all of us pay for it. Right, which is what a government does, right? That's what you raise money for. None of us wants to really pay for this unless all of us pay for it, because I can't really control it, right? Some people will privatize it. So the reason we do this together is everybody pays for it and nobody can consume it, right? We're making it, and that's what the parliament should be doing, right? All right, so it's okay, people are turd flinging monkeys that can talk. That's we gotta let ordinary humans have their day.
I know, I agree, we agree. And I think, but it is first principles thinking. So it is adherence to conforming to reality.
Right, it's basically, it's just responsibility. In essence, conservatism is responsibility. It's saying I'm responsible for everything in my domain, but I'm not responsible for those things that you should be responsible for because they're in your domain. However, if we need to be responsible together, we can get together and decide that, but we have to decide it and we have to make sure it's reciprocal. In other words, it doesn't violate responsibility. It's really simple, but from a conservative standpoint, it's like, if you ask about what's God, which is good, right? Guns, which is sovereignty, and country, which is law. Well, guess what that is? That's force, that's faith, and that's liberty, which is the trifunctional method. So if you look at the ternary logic, the trifunctional society, you look at it as like, that's all they have to know.
That's right.
They have to know. It's
that's funny.
That's all they have to know.
That's God, funny guns. That the liberals recognize it.
What?
The liberals recognize it and make fun of it because
it's because they don't want to be responsible. And because they can't predict. That's the whole problem that we really face here, is that they can't actually see the future. They can only see the experience. So they can't see the outcomes. They actually can't do it. So, and even if they can do it, they value the experience in the moment more so than the outcome, which is fine if you're a mother looking for your toddler, but it's not fine if we're trying to run a polity. So it's just a liberal or a progressive is really someone who's constrained to the familial, whereas a conservative really needs to be out there in the political. And the reason is simple: is that if you look at moral instincts, the left liberals, progressives, they're specialists. They only specialize in harm care. That's all they do. Whereas conservatives are generalists. We specialize in all the moral axes. In other words, we account for all of them. We do full accounting. So you have specialists and generalists. Well, what does that mean? That means I have somebody who's designed for running families and children and getting along interpersonally, and I have a group of people who are evolved to run the polity. And the problem is we commingled these two faculties into one government system, whereas previously under trifunctionalism, we had military, the state, we had the law, the common law, and we had the faith, and we had that for 5,000 years. We didn't have called a church, we called it religion. And then when we got into modernity, we collapsed everything into the state, and that's where we got into our problem.
This is very funny. So today on the Twitter feed was very interesting because Just Pearly Things was on it, and she was just debunking the supremacy of the feminine.
I think I saw that
exceptionally well. It just slamming dunking it, just hitting it with what the real facts are and the lies that are associated with the facts which demonstrate it to be false. All these preconceived notions about femininity being superior. And then another thread was talking about and he was a participant. He's like talking about that's why the devil goes after the women.
Yes.
I replied to that one because I'm like, I said Malleus Maleficarum was talking about this in 1450.
Yep.
And it's a consciousness of it. And it is the interjection of the feminine into the polity is the problem that has been recognized by Western civilization as problematic and I think by the other team, they recognize it as problematic for you, but they want to crush you as enemies because they have to. They're obligated by behavioral economics. They need to put themselves in charge. That's their group revolutionary strategy.
Well, because they're mothers, they have to be in charge of their children. Because right, it's just I say that because the closest approximation I can use to express the intuition, but the intuition exists for a good reason. It's just intuitions apply to domains, right? They don't apply to the unit, right? So in the conservative, we have this spectrum of moral intuitions, and the progressives, they have just one or two. The harm care one and somewhat the liberty oppression one.
So just to dive into that a little bit, is that intuition is a moral function. Is that fair?
Intuition includes a moral function. In other words, intuition could be that it could be that this is a cup, or intuition has a broad. It's basically
okay. So
technically you separate valence, value, from identity, right? So this is identity, consequence, and valence, which is the value. So intuition is one of the valence is one of the inputs, one of the intuitions. Because what's intuition? It's just some part of your brain predicting something.
Okay. I appreciate that little exposition. I have to do this now, just for the audience to be aware that we just had a good quote there on intuition. That was useful.
I wish I could just brain dump and give it to everybody so they could just we're
doing it. We're doing it the best we can, Curt.
It's just too frustrating because it's like I believe I have the correct and most complete understanding of the mind as it actually operates, from the neurochemistry to the neurological structure to the organization of the brain to the circuits. I'm not saying that there are people who don't know more about any piece of that or but they mostly have a medical rather than operational view of it. And so what I find is that because I looked at an operational view of it, not a medical view,
right,
or a corrective view, or I didn't look at the problem with segmentation is you might look at chemistry or structure all right, but you don't look at what the hell is this thing doing? Turns out what it's doing is dead freaking simple, and that's mostly due to just really one scientist, right? And what it turns out is it's doing this a really stupid simple thing. There's just so much of it, right? That it basically forms a competitive market, which we would call a simulation, right? Competitive market that results in getting our attention because it happens to be good. We identified something good or bad, right? The valence went positive. We're supposed to be here at homeostasis. Oh, that's bad. Oh, that's good.
This balance.
This lets me daydream or sleep. And that goes, this bad gets me, oh, and this good gets me, yay, but I mean, that's all that's going on there. And even when you get to emotions, it's like, what do you expect them to feel like? Well, you got this thing called qualia. I'm like, what the hell do you expect it to feel like? That's just what your body feels like when it amps up its energy to do this, or shuts down its energy to do that, or prepares itself for that. So you're calling chemical processes that change the state of your body as emotions, but really they feel like because that's what it feels like. Right. I mean, it's not just kind of stupid. It's like, it's the same thing where people get all like, do we see the world as it is? I mean, you can put a camera, you can poke a hole in a piece of paper, put it on a window and project the world in upside down on the opposite wall. Right. I mean, we see the world as it is. Right. The problem that what we don't do is disambiguate it equally.
That's correct.
Right. We don't break that set of patterns into valences, right? Importances. I'm using the wrong word. We don't break the world into spit, because we do basically say, here's a background, here's a space, here's a thing, and here's a thing in motion. Right? I mean, that's really all it does. Right? That's all.
Right.
It goes this way or this way. It just does that. So when you see how simple the brain is, it gets to be pretty easy to understand what people are doing. Well, we have all these stories, stories we tell ourselves, and it's just amazing, and then the other thing is that we want to believe that, like, I'm observing you and you're observing me, that there's an observer inside. There's no observer. It's what you think is the observer is just that thing doing homeostasis before, right? That's the feeling. And beneath all this other crap that's going on in this competition, this freaking cacophony. And because this is happening in sequence, right? And that our brain is a series of recursive loops that keeps the past alive for 3 seconds, right? We perceive it as continuous. I mean, but it's not. I mean, you can make a machine do it. It's not rocket science, right? The problem is making a machine do as complex as we do.
Right.
If you look at the way machines are architected, right, they talk about 30 billion parameters, but that's nothing, right? 30 billion parameters in an AI or 70 billion parameters in AI. I mean, you talk about, you get down to what dendrites are calculating, and God knows, I mean, it's trillions, right? I mean, we have no idea what they're calculating.
What's going on in there?
Never will, right? And the only thing that happens is if you see similar phenomena to I, because we have the same bodies and about the same vision and hearing and taste and smell and whatever, you see things from a higher perspective than I do, right? Because you're talking. So that's why I had to throw that in there.
Silly shit. I appreciate the silly shit as much as the real stuff too, buddy. It's just, it's like seeing if you're awake, man.
It's just, but really we perceive things marginally and differently. So despite the fact that we might be wired very differently upstairs, the average of all those wirings comes out to be about the same, right? That's right. So it's just really simple. And so when you work with, that's why, I mean, most philosophers need to go home. They just need to go home and open a beer and take up painting or something, or knitting.
Oh my, knitting. Oh my. So I've talked to my sister about this, right? I talked to her.
You're trying to talk to normal people about this stuff.
No. I just talked to my sister, and I talk about people like this. It's like this. I go. so many words.
Yeah.
It's like, really, it's not that complex. Why do you use so many words? It's
Well,
okay,
then, that's interesting because you're talking to a woman, right? And
right?
so we have this whole, and I love that this is becoming mainstream finally. But feels and reals are experiences and outcomes, right? And so this male female dichotomy is coming to the front again, right? After all this attempt by feminists to say we're indifferent, what we're actually doing is the failure of that theory, resulting in
Well,
the
that's
collapse of relationships.
demonstrated failure.
Exactly, demonstrated failures resulting in a reawakening, a reawareness of sex differences and how vastly different we really are.
Wait, it goes to this. Oops.
Oops, yeah. It's like you want to smack them in the head. So you go through this thing and you're talking, and every man has, I don't know about your wife because she's pretty analytic, and my wife is relatively analytic, but you're talking to most women, and it's nonsense, right? They're just reliving emotional experiences as a narrative in great detail, and they're reliving that thing, right? Re-experiencing it. And we sort of I pulled the bow back, I shot the bow, and hit the thing, right? I don't talk about the feelings of the arrow when it's going through the fucking air and how the different, right? I mean, but women do, right? And so they perceive the world this way. And so it's just fascinating when we can actually begin to understand each other, because we've developed enough of a commonality of protocol, right, to be able to understand each other. But even then, my wife would never argue with me on certain things, and I'd never argue with her on certain things. I'm like, you're just, you're just a woman. You can do that shit. I can't do that. But, and I'm a guy, and it's like, don't try to do what I do. You can't do it. Of course, I'm weird enough that my wife would say, well, nobody can do that, so I don't have to do that.
I think that's fair.
Yes. So anyway, so we're getting back to the whole purpose of this arc here is that we really have, we complain about how hard the job is, right? But the part of complaining about it, like what we do here, is coming up with the arcs that in other words, it's our struggle, right, to learn how to talk about things comes from this interaction. Like, it's not like I sit there by myself, right?
Can't do it.
The grammar's I could do.
It's just self-recursive then, and it doesn't encounter the resistances that it will encounter if you would talk
to normies. Yes. And so like what I say is that I understood the grammars, right? But it wasn't until I understood them. I thought they were obvious. And then I wrote them down.
It's just like this. Okay, so I have a back problem, right?
Yes.
So in the 3rd grade, I remember walking to school and having saddle numbness, so I get numb on the side of my hip, right? And I'm like this, perfectly numb, absolutely dead of sensation. And I just walked to school, and I didn't think twice about it because that's normal to me.
Yes.
And it's like, so the fact that you think that it's just obvious is the same damn thing.
Well, I'm just admitting that I'm an idiot like everyone else, right?
No, it's not. It's just like a fish water problem. It's like, yes. Well, of course, it's just right? How it is.
And so, like this morning, I'm listening to this video, and I'm getting mad because I think I don't see this guy's ignorance as innocent. I see it as he's spreading harm.
Okay.
Right, because he doesn't know any better. Well, isn't that what most people do? They spread falsehoods and harms because
that's accurate. I think that's most likely accurate. That there's very little actually aware and intentionally malicious people.
Right. And even when they are
in the academic world, I mean, it's like they're mostly unaware and inattentive and malicious by that there's a term for it. So it's
I'm going to say that's true of men, and women too. However, if we looked at leftist women, it's not true. They apparently have bad personalities.
They're intentionally damaging.
Right. It's like men are stupid and women are evil. I don't know. It's like academic men.
So men are bad, women are evil.
Evil, right? There's It's just one of those things where you talk to men and they're like, well, they're out there trying to get attention and whatever, but the female's actually trying to undermine. Right. And so you see.
Well, I think it would go to this is we go back to the prediction function that the men.
It's compete versus undermine. Sorry. They're just competing.
It's like but the men are projecting into the future and the women see a zero-sum game.
Yes.
So it's like, in order for me to gain, someone must lose.
Yes. So bad. Anyway, so what was I trying to make? Well, I was trying to get an arc out here, which was really the mathematical problem, right? I mean, to show that the grammars, the dimensions, the unification of the sciences, no universally commensurable system, and that it, you know what, it's actually pretty hard. I understand why it's hard for people to learn this, right? But if you look at it without having all the garbage in your head, it's actually really simple.
Which this lends itself very well to the premise that we can easily generate a training system that trains children within this paradigm. It's easily done because there's no preconceived errors.
Right. So we give them the tools early so they don't go sideways. Anyway,
it's just like the free radicals. They're radicalized because they've been bent out of shape by the circumstance, by accident. Is how Aquinas would talk about it.
Yes. Well, it's like what's his Rawls' veil of ignorance, which is a great moral question that is totally inapplicable to law.
Please tell us.
It is that we want to ensure other people that because if they are born at a disadvantage, we want to ensure them if all possible, because we say, I could easily be you.
That's right.
So that's developing reciprocity.
Right.
Right. So we can ensure them. That's different from enabling them to do harm.
Right.
And so the veil of ignorance is that when you do that at political scale, you can't, because you end up with dysgenia, right? You end up with dysgenia and decline, which is what we're having now. But if it's an individual person and you're taken for, that's a cost you can determine whether you can bear, right? And that person is still bound by an empirical result, which is the people around him or her carrying that burden. Whereas you move into the state, that person becomes demanding and irresponsible. Well, it's the same thing with the female in marriage, right? If they can get the subsidy from the state, they abandon the responsibility of marriage and reproduction. So we get this. So you can't generalize the empirical requirement for individual responsibility. Anyway, so the veil of ignorance is one of those progressive bits of nonsense that's made its way into our law. Well, it's a very spiritual, religious, small scale village type of method of epistemological questioning, right? Should I insure people? Well, the reason you want to insure people is because if you don't insure them, they become trouble, right? I mean, that's actually the answer, but that's different from having them reproduce, which is multiplying their trouble, which is the problem.
Multiplying your trouble,
right? The trouble that they make, right? And so, you can't scale up something that requires one-on-one judgments. Right. So the problem is these things don't scale. So what you want is an impersonal bureaucracy that is moral. And you want but that is empirical. In other words, it has to say, we can't do that. At the Lund level, it says, I will do it anyway. That's different. So these are again, as you notice, how many scale problems we run into, because we already talked about, like, Darwinianism is a thing at scale, but what we do is universalism is like, it's across all scales. It's like the general, it's like we were having the problem yesterday, and I don't know why I had such a problem with yesterday. I must have been not all my game or something.
What's that?
Well, I was having such a problem working on that stuff we were doing yesterday. I just couldn't get my head around it, and it's probably because I didn't get enough sleep or something. But you trying to generalize something across all scales, if you're not even in the business of providing examples, you're providing formula, which then you get down to the math problem. And that's why we have to say, here's the formula and here's the examples at scale, because otherwise we don't get to make the general point and then make it stick with examples. Sorry, did that make sense to you? I'm watching you and I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's like this, because I was pondering on it, because I was working on this Frankfurt School example problem on Twitter. And so Martin came in and just slapped me around a little bit in his own pointed way, right? And that was good, because it caused me to reconfigure my understanding and put it to make it work. And it was like, but it was challenging. And it was like, okay, but I think it's entirely useful that all of these examples that we'll come up with, but we do need the general formula to understand it.
Yes.
And that's
we need a general formula to know why it's consistent across all scales. Right? It's so that we can't take a scale and then make magic nonsense about it. Right. Which is what we do. We take this particular scale and we take the rules of that scale, and then we invent all sorts of other shit around it, and all of a sudden it's discontinuous with the rest of the projects, right? So the whole point is to say, okay, this is the base. Just like in mathematics, what are you trying to do? You're trying to create a baseline in which you can measure things, right? That's the problem with math, right? It's like, what's the reference point in which I measure distances from, or whatever changes from, right? That's what math is about, is creating reference points. So in other words, a stake in the ground that I can measure from. Higher math anyway. And so you get the same problem with people, is that we're creating the universal commensurability creates the laws of the universe, and this is how they work. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do it exactly that way. It means that if you're going to vary this by this much, you're going to pay X times that cost for the variation. The more you vary, the worse the cost. But it also says you can't lie about it. Right. You can't lie that this is not good. Right. You can't lie that something you claim is good is good. It's not good. It's definitely not good. And so you might say
it's a costly indulgence. It's not
good. And so you don't get to lie about it. Right. I mean, that's the whole thing, is that people think we're coming out here saying, thou shalt. And I was like, no, thou shalt only be honest about it. Right. So that you're not committing an act of fraud. All right. And the second thing is, you say, well, who am I? If I'm committing this fraud and we all agree to this fraud, who's paying for it? And what most of us do is we say, well, the next generation. That's what we've been doing now.
And that's rude.
And that's fucking evil, right?
Yeah.
So generally, that's, usually generational things were kept in families, and now we've externalized it and gotten rid of the responsibility.
Everybody's avoiding responsibility for paying for their
misjudgments, their malincentives. But anyway, so that's what I was trying to get across in the arc today. Now I've gone over my hour with you, but so that's our hour-long chat today. I had fun with this discussion. Was this interesting?
I enjoyed it.
What do we call this discussion? What are we talking about? I don't know. We talked
about that. That's I would say it's universal commensurability.
That sounds about right. So will you do your thing?
Oh, right now?
Yep.
Hey, you like it, subscribe. Don't forget the notification bell.
Leave comments.
Love this part.
Leave
comments.
All right, I'm behind in posting these things, so I'll probably get yelled at by
Oh
somebody.
my lord, someone's gonna make it.
I got Luke's book I gotta post and these things and whatever.
They're starting to take up space.
All right, so we'll shut it down here and then in a moment we'll start on our working session. Oh, we gotta get more coffee. Yeah, my coffee cup's dirtier than yours today. I win. I win.
I'm so proud of
I
myself.
win. All right, bye everyone. Thanks for, it's Sunday, September 3rd. Bye-bye.